Admit.
We're doing great.
All right. I'll just keep admitting. Let me see if we catch up here. Oops. Okay. I think we're caught up. All right. Should we go ahead and get started since it's 7:30?
Sure.
All right. I am so excited to see everyone here tonight to talk about small groups. We notice in our Facebook group that people are always asking, how do I make a small group? What do I do in my small group? What do the other kids do? So we are very excited and honored to have Dr. Contesse with us tonight from UFLI. And I don't want to waste her time, but I just want to remind you before she gets going, make sure you keep yourself muted. And I think that's all we have to say. You can put your questions in the chat if you have any, and that'll be all. And I want to give her all the time that we can because it sounds pretty exciting what she has for us. So Dr. Contesse.
Thanks so much, Courtney, for planning this, and all of you for joining me this evening. It's such a, hard time these days, and it's a short week, and you made time for this, so I really appreciate that. So I'm going to share kind of our agenda for tonight. Like Courtney mentioned, feel free to engage in the chat either through comments, questions. Courtney and I will kind of touch base once in a while in case there's any questions that I should address for the big group, or if we should wait till the end. But our goal for tonight is to begin by talking about the purpose of small group instruction and how it fits within the context of a 90-minute reading block. Then details about planning actual targeted small groups, which I'm sure this is why you're here tonight. So we'll talk about both foundational reading skills and different activities that can be used in small group, a little bit about assessments, different types of assessments and specific assessments for different instructional areas. And then we'll look at how to use lesson structures to plan instruction. Then, because we're talking about small group instruction, I figured we'd spend at least a little bit of time talking about independent practice at centers at workstations. So hopefully this sounds like a good evening to you all. And Courtney asked me to share a little bit more about myself. And so I am Valentina Contesse, and I am currently a clinical assistant professor at the University of Florida, and I work for the University of Florida Literacy Institute. I spent a lot of time here even before beginning my time as a faculty member because I did my doctorate program with Dr. Holly Lane from UFLI. She did the most recent other lit lab about phonemic and phonological awareness. And I've had the pleasure of learning from her through my time here, and now she's my colleague at University of Florida, and I continue to learn from her. And with UFLI, our big focus is both on teacher development and student reader development. And so all of our work focuses on those two things, both at the pre-service level, so with teachers and teacher preparation at UF, but also doing things like tonight. So talking to practicing teachers. So welcome all. Again, please engage in the chat. Feel free to ask questions. And so I wanted to begin. I know you all in this group are very familiar with this visual, Scarborough's rope, but just to position us for the rest of the evening, what I'll be discussing related to small group will focus on the word recognition aspect of the reading rope. Again, not to say that language comprehension isn't very critically important for our students, but I only have 1 hour, and a lot of the resources that UFLI has developed for teachers focuses on this word recognition part. And then I wanted to share this visual that kind of helps us break down a 90-minute reading block and what we may include. So as you can see, it's broken down into 30, 30, 30, and we know no classroom or reading block is ever perfect, and you're never going to spend exactly 30 minutes on each. But the overall idea is that you would be focusing on word recognition for about 30 minutes, and then another 30 minutes on that language comprehension part of your instruction. And so typically most teachers have about 30 minutes in in order to provide differentiation for students. And part of that differentiation time is small group instruction. Small group instruction can be for review and remediation, which is what we'll focus on tonight, but also enrichment. And like I mentioned before, part of that time also has to be with students working independently so that you can provide targeted small group at your teacher table. So when planning small groups, again, for the purpose of review and remediation, there's a few things that we have to identify as teachers. So the most important part is who needs review and remediation, right? Hopefully not every student in your class will need review and remediation in these foundational word reading skills. Another important question is who will provide it. So some of you may have co-teachers that you collaborate with, or interns or paraprofessionals. So that's another important question. Of course, what's the instructional focus? So even when thinking about foundational reading skills, not every student may need small group targeting all the different skills and concepts. Another important question is the format. So of course, we're focusing on small group instruction, but there may be skills that students can review by working with a peer or independently, which we'll kind of talk about when we talk about centers and workstations. And of course, we need to determine how much time is needed. And this is based on student needs. So if students have a lot of need in an area, we would want to devote more time to targeting that need. And overall, just again, to get us started for the evening, the whole point of small group instruction for review and remediation is increasing how many practice opportunities we're able to provide students, right? So they're getting extra time and smaller groups so that you're able to provide more opportunities to respond and more feedback within your small group. Opportunities to respond are basically anything presented by a teacher, so questions, prompts, directions. Most students only need 1 to 4 exposures, or many students only need 1 to 4 exposures in order to learn something, but many of our students need many more exposures. So again, small group instruction allows you to provide more of those practice opportunities outside of the whole group lesson. I know Holly talked about this last time she presented, and most of you are very familiar with this as well. But when we think about effective instruction and intervention in particular, we need to remember that when we're planning this, just like when we're planning whole group instruction, we need to make sure that this is explicit for our students, it's systematic, and we'll talk a little bit about how we use a scope and sequence to make sure it's systematic. And when we're thinking about small group instruction, we're focusing on it being more intensive than the whole group instruction. So students have instruction for longer, they're receiving more opportunities to respond, and again, they're in a smaller group, which allows them to have more practice opportunities with more teacher feedback. In addition to those 3 key elements, we also talk about the importance of, again, finding any way to increase opportunities to respond, but also ensuring that we as teachers are providing both behavior-specific praise about things that students are doing really well, and also corrective feedback. I work with a lot of pre-service teachers, and I see very frequently that they are almost scared to provide corrective feedback related to student learning, right? And so we talk a lot about it's okay to provide feedback if students make errors, right, in a gentle way, but we need to address when students make errors. So anyway, I could talk more about those few things alone tonight, but moving on. We really like this visual because it shows us that planning targeted small group instruction depends on assessment, and that this is a cyclical process. We begin by planning based on assessment, then we provide instruction, but then we continue to assess because if students aren't making gains and showing growth, we need to look at our plan again. And so we'll kind of come back to this visual throughout the night. So to talk about planning small group instruction, the instructional activities part, I figured I would walk you through our UFLI Virtual Teaching Resource Hub. And even though the resources that I'll be showing you tonight, of course, were created in order to help teachers with virtual teaching, we have found that most, if not all, of the resources can be used in face-to-face teaching, and the concepts of these activities are activities you can do whether you use these materials or other materials that you have in your classroom. And so here's a QR code if you're not familiar with the UFLI Virtual Teaching Resource Hub. It's a very handy resource. Is do have a suggested scope and sequence for you if your school doesn't have one available to you. As you can see from the little arrow, from the top to the bottom, the concepts go from simple to more complex. So this is really important when we're thinking about providing really systematic instruction, that we're beginning with the most simple concepts and slowly moving to the most complex concepts. So again, especially for intervention where we're trying to fill in gaps, it's important that we follow some sort of scope and sequence. The rest of the instructional activities section of the hub is divided into different types of skills. So you'll see here phonemic awareness, phoneme graphing correspondences, decoding and encoding, irregular and high frequency words, connected text, and writing. And you'll notice some sections have more resources than others, but hopefully you'll see something if you are new to the hub that you can take with you at the end of tonight for planning small group. So again, phonemic awareness is one of the areas that we have instructional activities for, and this is the ability to notice and manipulate individual sounds in spoken language. And it's really critical for decoding skills. So of all of the phonological awareness sorts of skills, the most critical to reading are blending and segmenting at the phoneme level, because they're the most related to reading and writing. So blending is when students or anyone combine sounds in order to say a word. And this is a really useful skill for decoding, because when students read words, they need to hear the sounds they say and blend them together. So we can think about phonemic awareness blending activities as a warm-up for reading activities. Segmenting just means separating individual sounds or phonemes in words so for example, the word fish, ish, be able to separate or segment each of those sounds. And this is the skill that students need to encode or spell a word. When students want to spell the word fish, they need to be able to hear the whole word, break it into its individual sounds, and then represent each sound with the graphemes. So again, these two skills, blending and segmenting at the phoneme level, are the ones that we should spend a lot of instructional time targeting. I recently wrote a blog post for a collaborative classroom, which people have shared is really helpful and teacher friendly, that further discusses this concept. So if you're interested in reading more about this, I'll also be sharing all the links with Courtney that I'm sharing as QR codes, because I know it'll be hard to scan everything if you are interested in some of these resources. So for phonemic awareness, one of the our favorite activities on the hub is one that uses Robbie the robot to help students blend and segment phonemes. So the activity has example words and a script for you to use for these activities. And of course, this is something that can be done in small group instruction for students that need support in the area of blending and segmenting. There's a few other activities. Dr. Lane or Holly talked about Okonon boxes during last session. So we have a resource related to that. We also have a sorting game that allows students to sort words by the number of phonemes in them, to be able to segment and count how many phonemes are in a word, and a few other activities. I won't be talking about all of them just because of time tonight and wanting to get through everything. Phoneme graphing correspondences are really important to address, because as children develop early literacy skills, they need to be able to begin to associate the sounds of our language with the graphemes. So letters or letter combinations that are written language. So children must develop what we call is the understanding of the alphabetic principle. So that letters and sounds work together in really systematic ways to form words. And so the activities in this section of the hub help students make these connections. The section of the hub is divided by type of graphemes. So you have just the alphabet, you have consonant digraphs, consonant blends are addressed, which aren't a different kind of grapheme, but they're grouped together in the hub. Are controlled vowels, vowel teams, and then just a section for other graphemes. Another helpful resource that I think has been shared a lot on the site is the Facebook group is a blendable sounds video. This is particularly helpful if you have other professionals working in your classroom, so paraprofessionals or volunteers, just so that everyone working with your students are using the most blendable sounds. This is also really helpful to share with parents who are wanting to help support reading at home. So for phoneme graphing correspondences, some of the main activities here are visual drill. And so the way we do it on the hub is just having graphemes on a slide. The same activity can be done with grapheme cards, just paper cards, where students are seeing a grapheme, saying the letters, and then saying the sound. So for example, on the one on the slide, the student would say A spells ah. And of course, the more you incorporate this type of activity in both whole group and small group, the more automatic students are with being able to recognize that grapheme and saying that phoneme. Auditory drill is the opposite type of activity where the teacher is presenting the phoneme or the sound, and the student is representing what any grapheme that they know for that sound. For example, if the teacher says ah, the student would write on their whiteboard A. Or whiteboard or paper, it could be any writing utensil, paper and plastic sleeve, anything. What's really great about an auditory drill is once students begin to learn multiple graphemes for a phoneme, for example, the sound k can be represented with C, K, or CK. This activity allows them to, again, show you that they know that there's 3 ways to spell that sound. So these activities kind of are reciprocal and support in making students more automatic with those grapheme phoneme correspondences. We also have slides to help introduce different graphemes, again, in all those different types of sounds that I just shared. And then the key features of those grapheme introduction slides is that they help students learn the placement of that grapheme, so where that grapheme can go. So for SH, for example, it can go at the beginning of a word and at the end of the word. And then what we've done is also provide you with some example words and then a few words to do for guided practice. So even though this says grapheme introduction, you can use them for whole group instruction as introduction, but in small group, you can also use these kinds of resources to review concepts that have been taught in the whole group setting. For decoding and encoding, we have lots of resources. This is kind of our area at UFLI where we are continuing to learn a lot about and develop resources to help teachers. So once students learn grapheme phoneme correspondences, even just some, just like a few letters, they can begin both reading and spelling words. So we want to make sure, again, as soon as students know at least a few letters, that we are beginning to provide that decoding and encoding practice, and that we're providing both of those types of practice because they support each other. And so our decoding and encoding section has resources for word work, for reading big words. So a lot of resources about syllables and morphemes. So if you do work with older students, this would be a section that is probably helpful to you. Then we have word cards and word lists that again can be used virtually or face-to-face by printing, and then some games and principles that I'll share more about. So Again, just to be on the same page, decoding just means reading. So being able to translate print to speech, and encoding is the opposite, translating speech to print. And so again, these are reciprocal processes. So in our instruction, both whole group or small group instruction, which we're focused on tonight, we need to be addressing both when we're teaching new concepts or reviewing concepts. So for decoding and encoding, we have 2 virtual word work mats linked on the hub. And so as you can see, the one on the left is just the alphabet, and the one on the right has more advanced grapheme. So if you have tablets or laptops or even a smart board available in your classroom for small group instruction, this is a resource you could use to engage your students in word work and building words in order to spell them and read them. We also have what we call a blending board, a virtual blending board that allows you to create words for your students. We have on the hub a lot of tutorials that explain the use of these, both the why and then the how, if you are interested in learning more about these apps, we call them. They're not actual apps like on an iPhone yet. They're just web browser apps, but they can be saved on a tablet so that students could use them. But just to make sure to share, the word work mats are intended for the students to manipulate with. So teacher or student can manipulate them. The blending board is for the teacher to manipulate and make words for their students to read. So the focus of a blending drill in general is decoding automaticity. So just decoding, not decoding and encoding like word work. Of course, word work, so that reading and spelling sort of activities can be done with any kind of manipulative letters. So on the left, you see word work mats with Velcro being used. We do have that template on the hub as well if you are wanting to create them. They do take time, but they're such a useful resource to have. When I taught first grade, it was kind of the most handy thing that I could use, again, both in whole group and have students take them to the small group tables when they came for word work practice. And of course, magnetic letters can be used as well. We have a few other resources on there. One thing to remember to target encoding is just regular word spelling. So teaching students to spell words, but by teaching them spelling strategies. So one of the ones we use a lot in our professional development is this idea of pound and sound. So saying the word by pounding, for example, fish, and then sounding out each or segmenting each sound. So fish, ish. So them hearing every sound, they can tap on the table or lift their hand like this. And then beyond that, after that initial segmentation, also teaching students to say sounds as they spell. So ish. So it's another opportunity to connect that sound and the graphemes they're putting down. And after they spell, having them segment ish, fish. So lots of repeated practice, again, segmenting and blending sounds. Like I mentioned, we also have word cards and word lists that can be used for decoding or encoding purposes. If you're using them virtually, there's ones with animations, ones with visual isolation, but for face-to-face teaching for yourself, for teaching, you could also just print, for example, slide 2 to have a list of words that target a specific concept for your instruction. Same thing with the word cards. We're working on kind of more printer-friendly versions of all of this, but for now, that's what we have to share. Another resource that is not our resource, but one of our colleagues developed is Finder. I don't know if any of you have heard of this, but this is a really handy resource that allows you to search for words that target specific concepts. And it's really nice because when you go to options, you can also change the number of syllables. So you can see here the options allows you, for example, to just look for one syllable words with that ARR grapheme. And so just another really helpful thing for planning small group instruction and whole group instruction. You, of course, still need to know where your students are with the scope and sequence and what other skills they know in order to choose words. For example, if my students hadn't learned that G says D yet I couldn't use large at that point. So again, knowing your students and having your scope and sequence to make those decisions. But I love this resource, so hope you wrote it down. I mentioned we have resources for big words, so both matrices that help with morphemes and also morpheme trees. What's really nice about the morpheme tree resource, you can't see it because it's not screenshotted. Each of these slides that have, again, that morpheme and all of the words using that, have the words written out in the notes with the definitions. So really helpful teaching tool that, because some of these words, you kind of know the definition, but in order to share it with a student, you might have to look some of them up. So wanted to point that out since you can't see it. For irregular and high frequency words, we do have resources for both irregular words and high frequency words. So for irregular words, we do have resources for using kind of that hard word strategy for teaching the part that's irregular in a word. But we also have cards for fry words and dolch words because we know some schools are still utilizing those word lists. For high frequency word practice, whether it's regular high frequency words or irregular high frequency words, both reading and spelling is really important. And so just to remind you of that, our irregular word resource does have explanation here, but really the main thing to point out is that in the slides, when you open the file, it explains the part that's irregular. So for example, you see here that AI is underlined with the heart. So it says AI makes the eh sound. So again, another really helpful teacher tool where it tells you how to explain it to students that it's an irregular word. We get a lot of questions about what the blue and the green mean. Those squares just mean sounds that are regularly spelled, so not irregular. These are regular graphemes. We are going to edit them so that all the squares are just blue, but just wanted to share that. For connected text, we don't currently have our own resources, but we have linked a lot of different resources for accessing connected text. Many of these are free resources or have some sort of free trial. Some are more appropriate for the primary grades, which I know is the focus of this group, and some are intended more for intermediate grades. When reading connected text, of course, it's important to think about fluency. So when we think about fluency, we want to make sure that we're focusing on accuracy, automaticity, and prosody. So accuracy is being able to read without errors. Automaticity can happen both at the word level, so being automatic reading individual words, but also becoming automatic or gaining automaticity at the text level, which is what somebody just wrote on the screen. But I don't know how to fix it. And then prosody, so reading with expression, proper intonation, and phrase. Let's see, maybe I did that, I don't know. All right. Fluency is the bridge to word reading and comprehension. So even though we're talking about foundational reading skills, this is really, using connected text is really important because we want to make sure that we're supporting ultimately students' comprehension of text. When reading connected text, whether it's in person or virtually, really helpful things to do with connected text is engaging in repeated readings, echo reading with your students, and choral reading. We don't have time today, unfortunately, to talk too much about these, but just wanted to share those. For writing, we also don't have too many resources, but we do have a mnemonic for sentence writing that helps with editing, caps, and then some letter formation resources. So again, coming back to the visual, so we looked at resources and activities that can be utilized, right, to target specific skills in small group instruction, phonemic awareness, phoneme grapheme correspondences, decoding, encoding, application and connected text, writing, and of course, irregular words. But in order to really determine what skills to focus on and what activities to use to focus on those skills, we need to know about our students, what they know, right? And so we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about assessment, and I'll be sharing with you some resources that are free ways to assess students. So lots of different assessments can be used to support our instruction. So we'll spend a little bit of time talking about screening assessments, diagnostic assessments, and progress monitoring. And these are kind of boring slides, I'm sorry, but there's kind of no other way to talk about assessments besides just nitty gritty what they are. So screening assessments can be administered individually or with a group. These usually are quick and simple measures that are typically done at the beginning of the year or when students first come to a school. And these are really great for something like at the beginning of the year or at the beginning of working with a student, because it provides you an indication of who in the group is most likely going to need more instruction in specific skills. However, usually screening assessments prompt you to further assess students. So even though you kind of have a feeling that students will need more support in specific skills, you kind of have to follow up typically with students to find out what those supports would be. So that's when we move on to diagnostic assessments, which help us do that. These are typically administered one-on-one because, again, you're finding out much more specific information about a student's reading skills, and doing it one-on-one allows you not to just see the outcome, so the data, but also hearing the student provide responses. So how automatic were they? Even just their engagement with the assessment, were they more nervous to do this type of assessment or work with these skills versus these skills? So by doing it one-on-one, you're really able to learn a lot about your students' needs. Again, these measures will help you identify not just areas of weakness or areas of need, but also strengths. So we know as teachers, we want to utilize the strengths that students have academically. And so by doing these more in-depth assessments, we're able to learn those things about students too. But poor performance on these types of measures really either indicate need for additional assessment or really help you pinpoint specific areas of remediation or intervention, which when we're thinking about small group is really helpful information to have, especially for students who are having significant difficulties with their instruction. Sorry, my clicker's off. And then again, these types of assessments just really help you understand the nature of why the student is having difficulty in reading. Progress monitoring assessments can be administered individually or with the group. They should also be quick and simple. And the idea of these is that they're done in regular intervals. So some progress monitoring can be done weekly, some monthly, but the idea is that you're doing it more repeatedly to kind of see growth across time. And these assessments provide you with an idea of within the group, who is doing well, who is excelling, who's doing as expected, and then again, who needs more targeted support. And then again, these assessments help you continue to identify instructional needs as the year progresses. So now I wanted to share just some resources for assessments that you can use to assess different skills, but I wanted to pause here, Courtney, and ask if there were any questions in the chat or anything that you wanted me to address.
Someone asked if you had decodable text available, which you answered that. You showed your resources. And then there was a question about when students get stuck at continuous blending stage. Did you want to answer that now or wait till the end?
I can share a little bit about that. So even though this isn't specifically about that, a lot of the students who are probably needing small group instruction are the ones that you're referring to. So of course, when you begin working with students that have significant difficulties with blending sounds in order to read words, you want to begin with those sounds that are continuous. So words that have continuous sounds at the beginning. And the idea is that the more practice that students get with that, and that you're really encouraging them to make those sounds continuous, that those kinds of skills will transfer to words that don't have continuous sounds. But if students are continuing to have difficulty making that jump of being able to blend with stop sounds at the beginning, that tells you that in small group, you probably need to continue doing a lot of continuous sound blending, and just getting students to be more automatic and accurate with that type of blending before wanting to make that jump completely of focusing on words that don't have those continuous sounds at the beginning. So I hope I answered at least part of the question. Feel free to follow up, and we can chat more at the end too about that.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
So for phoneme segmentation, DIBELS does have a subtest. That's the phoneme segmentation fluency. This is just a 1-minute timing that assesses students' ability to segment words with either 3 or 4 phonemes. So again, this is an assessment that you could do with your whole class, or just a group of students that you're noticing is having difficulty with phoneme segmentation, just to see where their difficulty is. So what's really important about most of the assessments I'll talk about is not just scoring them as right or wrong, but making a lot of notes about their errors, because those notes about their errors are going to tell you a lot about their ability and what they're having difficulties with. For example, if I'm making markings and I look at it and I notice that most of the words that students were not able to segment had short I in them, that tells me that in my small group, I need to target segmentation with short I. So making lots of notes on our assessments, whether they're screening or diagnostic or progress monitoring, really helps with making those database decisions for lesson planning. For phoneme graphing correspondences and decoding, our go-to is the Core Phonics Survey, which comes from this book. But there is a free version of it through Scholastic, and I do have the QR code in just a minute. But really what a Phonics Survey allows you to do is it allows you to assess alphabet skills and reading and decoding. And so the purpose is to figure out how they're doing with application of phonics concepts. So the top portion of the Core Phonics Survey assesses alphabet skills and letter sounds, so both letter naming and consonant sounds and vowel sounds. And then the part at the bottom helps assess reading and decoding skills. And what's nice is that both the Core Phonics Survey and the Scholastic version has the words divided into different categories. And as you can see here, for the most part, it mimics kind of a scope and sequence where it goes from simple to more complex, like you see here with assessing words that are CVC words with short vowels all the way to multisyllabic words. And so this is what the alphabet skills and letter sounds assessments look like. Again, not just marking things wrong, but writing down what students' errors were so that you can interpret that and help use that information to plan your instruction. And this is what the word reading parts look like. It's nice because it tells you with a little script kind of what to say too. And so, because I know assessments sometimes are a little bit stressful to administer, but this one is pretty easy to get a hang of. For the reading and decoding, the Core Phonics Survey has 2 lines of real words, and it always includes one last line of pseudo words with those concepts to see if students can apply those phonics concepts to words that are made up. And I'm gonna click through a lot of this assessment stuff, but if you want to follow up and email any questions about any of the assessments, feel free to do that. I'll share my email at the end. This is the QR code for the free version of that phonics survey. It's slightly different. The word reading lists are out of 10 instead of out of 15, but overall it still helps you assess students in the same way to find out more about their phoneme graphing correspondence knowledge and their decoding knowledge. Phoneme grapheme correspondences can be assessed too by just doing grapheme checks. So which graphemes that I've taught and reviewed have students mastered. So having grapheme cards and then a list of the graphemes that you can just mark off which ones they got correct or incorrect. DIBELS also has a nonsense word fluency subtest that helps you find out information about decoding. And so that is another timed assessment. Oop, I'm having trouble clicking. This is an assessment that's really helpful to do with their progress monitoring probes, because you can track how they're doing with their nonsense word fluency throughout different months. And so DIBELS, just in general, for their subtests, have benchmark assessments that you would do 3 times a year for whatever decisions related to that, but also progress monitoring probes like you see here could be graphed on a graph like this. Also, DIBELS has an oral reading fluency probe, again, for benchmark reasons or progress monitoring, that allows you to assess students' accuracy and automaticity with connected text. And all of these assessments have benchmarks for, beginning of the year, middle of the year, and end of the year, and all of that information is available online for free. So here's the QR code for DIBELS. And again, I'll share all the links with Courtney. So now we'll spend the rest of our time kind of putting these parts together. So we've talked about activities that can be used to target specific foundational reading skills. Now we've talked about some assessments that can be used to find out information about these skills. And so now we're going to talk about how to put those things together to plan our small group instruction. And so, hi, Dave. That's okay. So once we know from assessment data what skills students are needing support with, we can make decisions about grouping, right? We want to make sure that when we plan for small group, we're planning for students that have similar needs, not always the exact same, but at least similar needs, so that we're making our time with them the most efficient and useful. So when planning small group instruction, the reason again why I wanted to talk about assessment is we really need to make sure we're always making database decisions about grouping, so that we're using weekly or monthly progress monitoring data, that we're continuously using observations during lessons. So this can be whole group lessons, small group lessons, and any other kind of assessment data that we have from our students. And it's just really important for us to not make assumptions of what students need or what they'll continue to need. So that's that idea of continuous assessment, right? A student may need really targeted practice with phoneme grapheme correspondences at the beginning of the year, but then with your really amazing small group instruction, they might not need that anymore. So we can't assume that because they began a year or a semester needing something that they'll always continue to need that as part of their small group instruction. Another important concept related to this is flexible grouping. So students don't always have to stay with the same group because their needs might change. And again, the goal of our small group instruction is to provide as many opportunities to respond for students as we possibly can, and that we focus those opportunities to respond with the skills that they most need practice with. And then the last really important piece is this concept of dosage. So how much small group instruction are students getting that target these individual skills? So how many days per week is a group or a student going to get some sort of small group targeted practice, and how much time per day? So not all students have to go to small group for the exact same time for the same amount of days, right? We make all those decisions based on assessment data and what students need. So now to talk more about how to put all of this together, we talked about assessment data. We talked about having a scope and sequence that helps us determine what skills we're addressing, not just in small group, but in whole group. And then we're thinking about which students can be grouped together based on needs. shown by assessment data. And then of course, we need to know how much total time we have for each day for small group instruction and throughout the week. Some of you in the group may be interventionists who have longer than maybe classroom teachers. And so all of these decisions are based again on your overall time that you have to support students. So now we're going to look at kind of this chart to talk through some of the kind of thought process while planning small group making small group decisions. So on the left here, you see different areas of focus, and I made them related to those sections of the hub, which we talked about. But you may not need to address all of these, or of course, again, these only address word recognition types of skills. But a group may need time with all of these different skills, right? As a teacher, I know that they need small group instruction that somehow includes all of these parts, but based on time, I know that I can't address all of them daily. So I may do like an A schedule where some days when I meet with this group, I target phonemic awareness, phoneme graphing correspondences, decoding and encoding, and irregular words. And then on other days, I focus on applying that in connected text and writing. So again, I'm still making sure that students are all of students' needs are being addressed, but due to time, I'm staggering, right, the kind of activities that I'm doing with this group of students. You may have a group of students that need a lot more targeted support with specific things, like you see here with the overlap with decoding and encoding, irregular words, and connected text. So for this group, I've identified that they need that kind of practice daily, all 5 days, right? And so I'm making sure that I'm addressing that every day. But then some of these other areas of focus only get addressed on some days. So again, the things that students need most support with, you'd want to do with higher frequency or higher dosage. You'd want to provide more of that type of practice. So back to the hub, in the lesson structure section of the hub, we do have some templates for small group lesson planning. Again, even though it's a virtual teaching resource hub, all of this can be used for in-person teaching. So I just wanted to share some of those with you. So we do have just a blank template, which is a Word document that has those different areas of focus that I shared, and has a space for you to write how much total time you have with a specific group during that day. You may only have time to pull small group 4 days a week and not 5 days a week. So the Word document allows you to delete rows or columns to meet your planning needs. It also lets you break down the total time into more individual time, right? And again, you can edit this. So if a group doesn't need any phonemic awareness support during small group, you could delete that row completely and not even have it. And then down here at the bottom, you have an instructional activity menu that links to the virtual hub, but also just provides some ideas for activities that you can use to target these different areas of focus. There's also a sample, just a simple sample that just has the types of activities used to address. Again, these are small groups that the teacher can see this group of students for 20 minutes, but again, your time frame with students may be completely different. And then there's a more detailed example that kind of breaks down to what you're doing for that activity. So what graphemes you're including in the visual drill and the auditory drill. Again, just examples to kind of see this type of idea for small group lesson planning. And then there is also just a sample activity sequence for each grade. So you're in the primary grade, so there's one for kindergarten, first and second, but also the intermediate grades. And you'll see that one of them is highlighted. And so that one is actually broken down into a PowerPoint with slides for each of the activities. Again, even if you're not teaching virtually, just to kind of get an idea of the type of activities that can be done to address these areas of focus. And so now I wanted to, we're almost out of time, but I wanted to quickly share just some thoughts about independent practice within centers and workstations, because of course this is a really important part of being able to pull students to provide this really targeted small group. And so one of the main things about this concept of centers or workstations and small groups is that they should be created separately. They should be thought as different things, because we want our centers or in workstation grouping for our students to be in mixed ability groups, versus when they come to the teacher table, we want, like we've been talking about, we want to be able to provide really targeted instruction. So students from centers are coming to work with us on really specific skills and activities that we have identified that that group needs. So with this concept in mind, again, you may not meet with all the groups every day. Some students may miss center work, and that's okay. Most of the students that you'll probably be providing the most small group instruction to are really going to benefit more from your teacher-led instruction than practicing something independently. Not that independent work is not important, but just keep that in mind. It's okay if students miss some centers. Student behavior is something to keep in mind. So if a student has a really preferred center and it's a student who has some behavioral difficulties, you may want to ensure that you're not always pulling them from their preferred center, so that it doesn't become, some sort of behavior escalation about not being able to go to their favorite, like computer center, for example, is one that's very preferred for many students. So keeping that in mind. A few additional tips about managing centers or workstations. We need to make sure that all of the activities in centers are intended to be done independently, right? So the whole idea is that you don't want to have to assist the students with these activities, because you're really focused on providing that very targeted small group instruction. So making sure that students are really clear with what the routines are, how to manage materials at that workstation, so how to use materials, how to clean up materials, that the content in these centers or workstations are things that are familiar to them. So maybe not even review from the previous week, but weeks prior. So again, they can engage with this material as review material and not have to ask for help. And so the way that we get there is just through practicing, right, these activities and these routines at workstations, so that they don't have to ask or they don't frequently have to ask for assistance. Of course, students may need to ask for assistance for certain things. Again, center having really consistent routines is really important. That concept of not having to visit every center every day, that we want to ensure that our grouping is heterogeneous for centers or mixed ability, and that rotations can be quick, right? Long enough for students to be able to begin the activity, complete it, right? And hopefully be able to turn it in. We don't want them to be too long where students lose interest or they just don't have enough to accomplish. And we also don't want them to be too short where they can't actually engage in the activity. So depending on your total small group time frame, for example, you may have your students do 3 rotations or 2 rotations through centers. Now I wanted to share a few center ideas for skill review. So different skills can be reviewed at centers: phonemic awareness, alphabet knowledge, decoding, encoding, and irregular words. We do have a lot of resources for kind of the center type of activities under games and principles in the decoding and encoding section. So one of the activities that can be done in a center using the word cards that we have on the hub are word sorts. So on the left, you see a word sort with SH words, where the teacher is having the students sort with SH words at the beginning or at the end, where students are also being asked to highlight that new grapheme or that review grapheme in the words. But with any kind of sort activity, it's really important that the students know that the expectation isn't just to visually sort words, but to decode the words. So like if you were to get up from the teacher table, you'd want to hear them segmenting and blending ish, fish, right? And then sorting it and engaging with it. So teaching that expectation for that center. Sorts can also be used to review two different concepts, like you see there with SH and CH, which are frequently confused graphemes because they look similar and they sound similar. So using sorts for that kind of activity. On the hub, we also have roll and read templates that allow you to target specific skills, like you see here with SH, where the student reads or rolls the die, and then they read a word based on that number. These can be placed in plastic sleeves for students to cross out with a marker and be reused rather than having to print, for every group that goes to that center. We also have these really simple board game templates that can be used with word cards where students roll and move their little piece. But in order to stay there, they need to read a word, or vice versa. They read the word and then get to roll. So again, we're engaging kids with kind of more fun review activities using pretty simple activities and materials. If your students are familiar with engaging with word work in your small group instruction or whole group instruction, you can also teach them to do this with a partner. So where one student reads the words to the student, and maybe they don't just say the word, but also have to segment the word for the other student. And the student then, partner B, would build the words with, again, whatever manipulative letter they have. This is a type of center activity that requires a lot more teaching, but once students know the routines and kind of the expectation of partner A versus partner B, they can use it for all kinds of words and concepts. So, and kids love it because they get to be pretend teacher. Engaging with books is just another way that we can utilize center time. So students reading to self in the younger grades. I'm sure you've heard a lot of people talk about silent reading is not great. Students should still be able to hear themselves reading. So I know with COVID, whisper phones are tricky, but even just whisper reading, not even with a whisper phone, but them understanding that reading to self doesn't mean silent reading, that it can be whisper reading to themselves. Reading with a partner, which I'll share a little tip about, listening to audiobooks. So a lot of those connected text resources now have where it can be read aloud. And then if you have access to decodable text that can be printed, like Reading A to Z has printables, students can engage in activities of identifying specific words or graphemes within these texts that they can engage with, either highlight or circle or underline. When making pairs specifically for connected text reading, I just wanted to share this tip. Many of you might already know this, but using assessment data. So this is an example of first grade, middle of the year ORF data. You can see here the students' names and their ORF, so correct words per minute, from least amount of correct words per minute to most at the bottom in blue. And so what you do is you, again, put them from least to greatest, and then you split that list in half and put them side by side. So what this allows you to do when thinking about partners is that the discrepancy between the partners and their oral reading fluency is not too large, right? If we had put Ethan and Daniel together, Ethan would have probably been a little frustrated and Daniel would have felt like, oh man, I'm not a great reader. So just a tip for making those decisions for partner practice. So again, when planning targeted small group instruction, a big part of it is assessment and not just initial assessment. Okay, I've figured out my small groups, but this idea of continuous assessment. Just a few other resources. I know I'm almost out of time. I mentioned the core assessment book, which I'm holding up, but the Teaching Reading Sourceful is just a great resource. If your school ever offers you to buy you any kind of PD material, asking for this book, at least one copy for you and your colleagues, is so helpful. It has a lot of different information about all kinds of different areas of reading. At UF, we also have the Cedar Center, which have a lot of different free resources. And so I wanted to share, they do have one about assessment practices within MTSS, which might be helpful to you. And then Dr. Lane wrote one. It's a little dated now. It's from 2014, so she probably has to do an updated one. But these are evidence-based practices for grades K through 5. So you might find some of the information in those helpful. And I'll send the direct links to Courtney. I think she shared this last time she talked to you all, but she also wrote a really brief explanation of Erie's phases of word development. And so that's a resource there. And just a reminder that most of the things I talked about today are found on the Virtual Teaching Resource Hub. So I will leave my email up here for you to jot down if you have questions that you want to follow up about. But UFLI does have a Facebook and a Twitter and a YouTube. We're pretty bad with being systematic about the YouTube, but the Facebook is a really great way to hear about resources or professional development opportunities that may arise. Twitter too. So I am at my time, Courtney. So I will stop sharing so I can see some of you.
That was amazing. Thank you so much. That was a lot of information and much needed information. So do you mind if we ask a couple questions that are in the chat?
Sure, that's fine. Do you want to stop recording maybe so people feel more, or
yeah,
yeah,
we could.
Okay.
We could probably stop recording. That's fine.
Or if you want to ask, I don't know if some people feel uncomfortable with unmuting to ask questions. So
well, I'll ask the ones that were written in the chat, and then
okay, that's perfect. We'll keep recording. That's fine.
Okay. So there was the other part of the continuous blending question was, have you seen success with fluency grids?
With what?
Fluency grids.
I think I know what they're referring to, but they may have to follow up in the chat or on meeting. Is that where they add a word at a time? No.
Hey, how you doing?
Hi, Dave.
I'm good. What you're doing?
Good. I'm gonna type in my email here. Someone asked for it. Yes.
So that fluency grid, it's just like a grid that has words are kind of repeated, but you kind of focus in on reviewing and then the new skills as well, and it's just kind of mixed up. I was just wondering if you guys had any research with that.
More for automaticity, like putting automaticity. Not with that particular strategy, but the idea of blending practice, like I talked about a blending drill and using a blending board for that concept of just repeated reading with previously taught concepts in general is supposed to support, students becoming more automatic with blending. So if that activity accomplishes that, that's great. I know, I think Dr. Lane talked about word chains a lot last time. And so the benefit of word chains is that since only one thing changes at a time, it kind of builds their accuracy and automaticity as they go from word to word with their decoding practice. So I don't know if, in addition to what you were describing, these students are also maybe getting that kind of word chain decoding practice, but that would be a recommendation to try some of that blending practice, going from one word to the next word where only one thing changes.
Okay. Yeah, I love the word chains. That's great. And then like mixing in some nonsense words too. You guys are supportive with that.
Yes. Yes. Of course, we want to expose students more to real words because that's what will be in text, but just like the assessments do, putting in some of those nonsense words allow you to see whether they're accurate and automatic with words that are not familiar to them, right? Can they apply those phonics concepts? So absolutely, but definitely not, the majority of them should not be pseudo words, but once in a while, and the practice is good. Yes. Any other questions, Courtney?
Oh, we had another one that said, can you share a good resource to assess fluency, text or books?
Okay, so for oral reading fluency of connected text, the Dibble passages are great. They have them per grade level, and like I shared, they have them for benchmark purposes with benchmark goals. And then they also have, I think it's like more than 20 fluency probes per grade level to do it for progress monitoring purposes if you wanted to track on a weekly or monthly basis, in addition to doing the dibbles at the benchmark points of the year.
Right, and that's nice because it's quick too.
Yeah, quick, 1 minute. But especially if you do it with, you know, your whole group of students, you can really see which students are not meeting expectations and therefore need more support.
So I think you answered this. Any ideas for first graders that are reading on and above grade level for what they could do independently while I meet with struggling readers? And I think that would be those activities you talked about at the end.
Yeah, and when thinking about some of those activities too, finding ways to differentiate them to make them a little bit, you know, more appropriate for advanced readers. Like for example, instead of doing the word sort as a closed sort where they know the categories, maybe they have to do it as an open sort where they have to figure out the categories. So just thinking of ways like that where they can be engaging with similar materials, but their directions for using them maybe are slightly different to you know, accommodate that they are more proficient with reading. But those students who, you know, are doing fine with word recognition definitely don't need to come to you to small group for, you know, these types of skill activities. So we could spend a whole other hour talking about enrichment activities, but yeah, thinking of ways to make centers, you know, engaging for students so that they have purposeful activities to do while you're pulling your targeted small groups.
Right, because you hear people say, should I not do small groups because it wastes the time of the other kids, but you gave good ideas to avoid that. The only other question that was in the chat that you didn't answer, do you have any resources for free audiobooks for second grade?
Not off the top of my head, but like Reading A to Z has a free trial, and those books are like they can be assigned to students with to either listen or read, but not off the top of my head. But I can follow up with that person, Courtney, if you write down their name or if they want to leave their name. Epic, yeah, some other people are sharing resources that they have the read aloud capability. Students can also, I'm pretty sure, can read them independently as well.
And I just saw one more.
Yeah.
Oh, can you recommend any exit tickets?
Yeah, so that's another, we could spend a lot of time talking about this, but one of the things I frequently did is to assess encoding. So things like almost like a spelling test, but a quick, you know, measure of can they not just with words, but graphemes. Like if that week you taught specific graphemes or reviewed specific graphemes, that they can represent them on an exit slip, and also some words that incorporate those graphemes that were targeted. And then there's activities like quick ones that can be reading and matching words with pictures for primary grade. So a lot of that depends more on the skill that you're assessing in the exit slip. But yeah, that would be a great topic of just, you know, quick ways to assess in addition to these, you know, progress monitoring and screening assessments.
Yeah, it sounds interesting. That's all we have in the chat. Does anyone have anything that they want to unmute and ask? Your burning small group questions?
Well, thank you all so much. It was a pleasure. Sorry, I could barely even see many of you, but hopefully you got some nuggets here tonight. Feel free to follow up on email. Have a great rest of the year. Thank you for all you do. Hopefully you will find some of the resources shared tonight and on the UFLI Hub helpful to you and your students. Bye.
Thank you. We appreciate your time tonight.
Absolutely. And we can stay on, Courtney, if you want. I can stop recording.